Church, good morning. Good morning.
But you've been there.
I've been there. Yeah.
Thank you for coming
For like 15 years. So
to the day's activities. My name is Angela Kauser. I am the Associate Dean of Black Church Studies and Doctor of Ministry Programs and Associate Professor of Black Church Studies here at Louisville Presbyterian Theological Seminary. I want to welcome you to our 2019 Black Church Studies Consultation on Rural Ministry in African American Contexts. Let me give you a couple of pointers. One is you should have either a African American hymnal, or you should have a sheet of paper that has on it the Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing. In just a moment, we're going to be singing verses 1 and 3 of that as our opening prayer. Allison, would you please come forth and tell us a little bit about yourself and the exhibit for BCS 2019?
As Dr. Kauser said, I'm the artist in residence for this year's Black Church Studies Consultation. I am originally from Alabama, but I have lived in Louisville for almost as long as I lived in Alabama, so this is pretty much home for me now. I grew up in a rural area in Alabama and have lived in several small towns across the state. So when we talked about this year's theme of rural ministry, it really resonated with me considering my background. So I originally did an exhibit called Echoes of Alabama for the Intro to Black Church Studies class for my final project, and the class loved it so much they asked me to leave it up so that the seminary community could come and see it. It is a focus of pictures and narratives and an original piece of poetry that speaks to the struggle for civil rights in Alabama and the issues that our Black population faces in a rural context. So as part of the work that I've done as artist in residence, you'll see on the wall over here there is a small collection of rural churches in Kentucky. There's some captions that will tell you what the church is and where it's located. And then if you were in chapel, you saw a small collection of 4x6 pictures, some original photographies and some from civil rights web images that commemorate Black History Month. So when you see the exhibit, you can start anywhere. You can just wander around the room, but really it's best designed to start when you go into the right. There's a section on Birmingham, and then work clockwise. It basically just tells the story of the Black population of Alabama and their struggles. And I will be here all day, so if you have any questions about any of the photographs, feel free to hit me up. Thanks.
Dr. Richter, would you please come forth? Thank you.
Good morning. It's great to see everybody here for this exciting event. Indeed. I'm Don Richter. I'm with the Louisville Institute, which is headquartered right upstairs on the 3rd floor. Our executive director, Dr. Edwin Aponte, is also here with us this morning. Good morning, everyone.
good morning.
Just a show of hands, how many of you know about Louisville Institute? Okay, a couple of us in the room do. The Institute was started back in around 1991, and we are fully funded by the Religion Division of Lilly Endowment. And our particular mission is to support people who lead and study religious institutions and practices in North America. So we're not just a Presbyterian organization. We are indeed ecumenical, and we fund grants. We have 8 competitive grant and fellowship programs. And we fund scholars and pastors throughout the United States and Canada. So we are hoping that many of you, having been stimulated by this event, will come up with an exciting, important question that needs to be addressed, and you will send us a grant proposal to consider. We have, on this handout, we have emphasized two of our programs that especially include pastors. The first one is the Pastoral Study Project. It is for up to $15,000. And you know, if you've ever done a D-Min degree, some of you I know have, you pay the school and they tell you what to do. Here, we pay you to do what you want to do. We give you the money, and you can take a block of time, or you can take off periods of time to do the kind of study that befits pastors. It doesn't have to be always, you know, according to the academic standards, because pastors may have a different approach to how they engage a pressing question. And so that is what you can also, the Pastoral Study Project, you can apply with a colleague. If you have someone in ministry who is a kindred spirit and you really both are interested in some of the same questions, you can send us a grant proposal for that and, you know, find times to come together as a team and work on that. We do have another project, this Collaborative Inquiry Team Grant. It goes up to $45,000, but it's specifically for teams of pastors and academics or professional scholars in that area. Let's say, and we haven't had one on this topic yet, but let's say you're concerned about the payday loan situation, and you want to address this as a theological issue. Why is defrauding a problem for society, for the church? Why is defrauding especially a problem in communities of color that are consistently being taken advantage of? So a couple of you pastors that may find this an important topic could get together with some, you know, academic types who also see the problem there, and you could propose an adventure of 16 months to 3 years, where you would do different activities toward addressing that kind of issue. That would be for the Collaborative Inquiry Team Grant. So 2 programs. The Pastoral Study Project application, as it says, is, I think it says on here, yes, it's due every year September 1st. The Collaborative Inquiry Team Grant is due April 1st. This is actually a good time to be planning for either of those. The collaborative inquiry process, to have a compelling proposal, you need some good lead time. So you could submit an application this year, but you know, perhaps it'd be wiser to start working on something now toward next year if you choose to do that. Okay? The way to get the ball rolling is to say, here is my core question, and here are some things I think I want to do to address it, and some resources that I want to consult as I do that. And you email that to me, and my contact information is on here, and we get that conversation going. That's the way to start the ball rolling. Do we have time for a question or two? Any questions about these programs or this process? So again, President Pollard, or as he likes to be called, Alton, is the head of our Louisville Institute board, and we are delighted to have him and another wise group of leaders to help us with our mission and our ministry. But we are so grateful that you're here today, and we look forward to hearing from many of you in the future. So thank you.
All right, church, I think we need to sing. So if you are able, if you are able to stand, let us sing together the Negro National Anthem. Lift every voice and sing hymn number 540 in the hymnal or on the sheet in front of you. We're going to be singing verses 1 through 3, and we're going to pick up the tempo a little bit. So let's think about this tempo. Da, 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 ring with the harmony of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has taught us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. God of our wearies, God of our silent tears, God who has brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the light. Keep us forever in the path we pray. Lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee. Lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you, church. Please be seated.
That's it. You know what they still, yep.
Our plenary conversation will feature 5 experts in the field of rural Black church ministry. I have a series of 7 questions that I would like to ask the panelists, but I'm going to leave about 10 to 15 minutes at the end for your questions. So as the conversation proceeds, as you are stimulated in thought to ask questions, please write them down, and we will ask you to bring those forth around 9:40 a.m. We will end this plenary at 9:50, 9:51, 9:52, and then we will ask you to make your way right across the hall for the first set of lectures. For our panelists, if you would please introduce yourselves, your name, your ministry context, your current ministry context, and your connection or connections to rural ministry. And I'll start on the left with Reverend Snorton.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I am Claudette Snorton. I am the pastor of Greater St. James Christian Methodist Episcopal Church in Manchester, Kentucky. My connection to rural ministry is I'm a rural pastor.
All right.
I've been in ministry for 17 years. I've been a rural pastor for 16 of those.
Alton Pollard. My connection to
the rural church is I'm a former rural church pastor in the Baptist and in the AME traditions. And I've also done research in the rural church context, particularly in Macon County, Alabama, and have done publishing on the same.
My name is Raymond Bryant. I am currently the presiding elder of the San Antonio District of the African Methodist Episcopal Church. I oversee 22 churches. Half of them are in the city and half of them are rural. I was born and raised in rural Texas, and so I've spent 30 years as a pastor, and about a third of the time was pastoring rural churches.
I'm Amariah Mcintosh, currently the pastor of the Phillips Temple CME Church in Toledo, Ohio. But in 27 years of ministry, half of that has been spent in rural congregational spaces.
Kilen Gray, I serve as Dean of Student Engagement here at Louisville Seminary, and for 33 years have pastored the New Mount Zion Baptist Church in Shelbyville, Kentucky, and serve as the president of the Interdenominational Ministerial Coalition of African American Churches in Shelby County, over which the majority of those churches are rural churches, in collaboration with rural pastors.
Kilen, we'll start with you, and this is the first question to the panel. What does rural mean in your context?
Rural means those who are outside of metropolitan statistical areas, persons who are primarily strengthened by sectors of the economy that's primarily agrarian, and specifically in Shelby County is equestrian. The leading industries of Shelby County are the horse industry, the factories that are multiple in Shelby County, agrarian society. Farmers are makes up the overwhelming majority of those who are in the community. And so rural for our context would be those that are farmers, who are domestic workers, those who work in factories, small, populous, family connection that are strong and high within persons within that area of Shelby County.
In my context, rural are those communities that population-wise are probably less than 20,000 persons. The various communities are very close-knit. They only travel to metropolitan areas to take care of business, but are quite happy where they are. Most of them are homeowners and landowners, and kind of conservative theologically as well as politically in their thinking, but they are a great place. They are happy, well, they are proud of who they are. They have no regrets about the choices and decisions of life and living that they have made. They still exist, and they help others to exist in this space and culture.
Rural to me means being in the country. And if there is a town, it's extremely small. It would not approach 20,000. It wouldn't approach 5,000. But it means community. And it's a place where people stick together and they actually care for one another. They share with one another, and they make sure that everybody is okay.
Dr. Pollard.
I love what my brother just said. And I would simply add to that there are places where there are very few people living that some would describe as rural, but rural is not only about the number of people in a place, it is also about the number of resources. And there are places where there are very wealthy individuals living miles and miles apart from each other. That's not country. So we need to keep it real. This is about economies of scale.
Yeah.
And if you can go to a place and the people cannot afford, through not only volume of the people, but the volume of their pocketbooks, if they cannot afford human services, social services, quality educational institutions and the like, that's rural.
Yeah.
So you could be urban and be rural.
That's right.
When I was deciding what I wanted to describe as rural, I looked at what the U.S. Census says. And the U.S. Census describes rural as an area of less than 25,000 people. And then I brought it on home to Winchester. Winchester has about 18,000 people. Their economy consists of light manufacturing, the service industry, and technology. About 15.5% of the persons in Winchester live below the poverty line. And there's one interesting fact about Winchester. They're the home of L81.
What is it?
What is that?
It's a soda, a type of
Yeah,
soda.
it's a soft drink, L8.
L8.
With a lot of it's a ginger ale with a caffeine kick.
Okay. It's got caffeine in it? Oh. That makes it different.
It does indeed.
It also makes it
Got
pumpkin.
It does
caffeine.
indeed.
It's the caffeine in it.
That's right.
Make sure they sell it here and buy one for you.
Panelists,
Okay.
your second question. Describe African Americans. What does it mean? What is the range of what it means to be African American in your current rural context? I'll start with you, Reverend Smith.
In Winchester, and that's my context, there are 1,502 African Americans. I thought that two was But
Them the two babies in there.
648 of them are age 60 or older. That's tasty.
I could speak about a variety of different contexts, but let me just say, because my ties have been so close to Macon County in Alabama, which is a part of the rural black belt of the South, it's the home of Tuskegee University, so oftentimes people don't think of the fact that the vast majority of that county is not Tuskegee. It is the rest of the county. And in that county of 20,000 people totality, including the university, approximately 90% of the population are African American. It is an environment where more than 60% of the individuals there are not able to have a sustainable living wage, where 98% of the children are on school breakfast and lunch dependency, in a state that is already near the top, 48% of the children across the state, but in that county, more than double of the state average. Every health indicator going against black people, particularly black women, 36% higher incidences of breast cancer, even though presumably black women have lower rates of breast cancer. The numbers make no kind of sense. I could go on about heart issues, et cetera, but the economic indicators impacting health and life choices are enormous.
Thank you, sir. Dr. Bryant.
In my context, I see the gamut. I see people who are retired with pensions from oil companies, and I see people who were domestics and they're retired on Social Security at about $500 a month. So I see people who have everything, but about half of them have nothing. And so it's a challenge, because when you talk about issues, they only impact about half the people. and the other half may not necessarily want to talk about the other part because they don't want to think about that. But there are tremendous health disparities. There are a lot of people who struggle, who only see a doctor in the emergency room, who really need a lot of help. So in my context, I think that there's a lot of work to be done, and a lot of help is needed in having conversations and getting people to have real conversations about the condition of the community.
My context consists of those who were part of the Great Migration of the early to mid-20th century, those who came from Alabama, Tennessee, Mississippi, Georgia, Texas, moving northward for the economic opportunities and to leave the racial oppression of their southern communities. There's an expression that says you can take someone out of the country, but you can't take the country out of them. The value systems that they learned in their southern rural upbringing are still carrying them even in urban spaces.
Within the context of Shelby County, there is the wide continuum of socioeconomic realities among African Americans. So to be African American in Shelby County ranges from extreme poverty to middle class realities. We have historically, Shelby County touts some famous firsts as it relates to African American life. The first African American president of Kentucky Education Association out of Shelby County. The current chair of the Board of Education is African American. We have had African American chief of police, African American fire chief. And at the same time, we've had struggle, as mirrored in other areas of the country, struggles of economic depravity and different levels of economic proficiency. There are 17 African American churches to date in Shelby County, and all of them, if not most of them, if not all of them, are centered around families. And so what it really signals within what the realities of what it means to be African American in Shelby County is that family means everything, even in church. One of the jokes that we tell each other as pastors is that we pastor each other's cousins. And so what that means is that the collective reality of support for African Americans in Shelby County is collaborative, and it is really shown in funeral time. Regardless of whether that person goes to your church or not, you better go to the funeral. Right. You don't go to the funeral, it is known not only from your church, but in every church within the county. It's just that interconnected. Right. Family is central. And it's with all of the challenges to African Americans in Shelby County, outside of family, it would be worse than it is right now. Family is a foundational, sustaining factor within African American life in Shelby County.
Thank you. Question number 3, can you describe the range of what African American religion and African American church mean in your rural context? African American religion, African American church. I'll start with you, Reverend Snort.
In my context, we definitely are about service. The church is the place where you go to find the Lord. The Lord is going to take care of you. The Lord is going to keep you. The Lord is going to be with you. And that's what most of my people feel the church is.
Okay. And what's the range of denominational representations among Black churches in Winchester?
There are more than 30 churches in Winchester. At least 11 or 12 of them are African-American churches. There's one CME church, several
Baptist, Pentecostal.
Pentecostal. I'm the only female.
Okay, we're gonna come to that. Yep. Dr. Pollard.
The only difference I would say from what Reverend Snort just indicated is that in our rural context, people of faith are overwhelmingly Christian.
Yes.
You're not going to find many people who are of other religious traditions, and if they are, they're going to be quiet about it. Because there is a strong ambiance there that is to be maintained. And the growth industry with our, particularly our 7 traditional African-American denominations, designations, but the growth industry today, just like in the urban context and suburban, is the non-denominational fellowship. They are proliferating everywhere.
Okay. Dr. Bryant.
In my context, I think that all of the churches, because people are family, are connected. And there's AME, CME, Baptist, Church of God in Christ, Episcopalian, all, the whole gamut. So you have all the churches, but all the people are connected. And
You mean they're related? They're related to each other, even though they may be, they're related?
I grew up, my father was Baptist, my mother was CME. And so I went to the Baptist church, I went to the CME church. And I did both, alternate Sundays. And so the people have fellowships. And so there are these services that connect them. And not only do the services connect them, AARP is huge in rural areas, and so all of the people who are part of AARP, they meet in church, and they go to different churches, and they do different events. They go on trips, they do everything, and so it's almost one church, although they all have their own identity on Sunday morning. On Sunday afternoon, they're one, and they work together.
Through AARP?
Through AARP connects all of the churches. All of the churches. They have dinners, they have socials, they have trips, they do everything together, and all of the churches are part of it through AARP.
In the rural context I've served, they are ecumenical without actually calling it that. They support each other's revivals.
Yeah.
They go to each other's anniversaries. They go to funerals. They go to weddings. As we learned in worship last night, the songs that were sung, we all knew, no matter what our faith traditions were. Historically, before people built their own churches, multi-denominations would worship in the same spaces. In our CME context, we have had churches that were the Baptist church the first Sunday, they were the Methodist church the second Sunday. Same people, you just had a different preacher who came in. Yes. And then as they built their own structures, religiously they are very committed to their faith traditions. They just want the denomination, just tell us how much we owe and we'll pay it, and just leave us to do what we do. Also in rural spaces, they're not what we would call a lot of unchurched. At some point in their lives, they've all been part of the church. they've been christened, they've been baptized, they've received First Communion, they've been confirmed. As they get older, they may not attend, but when you meet them, they will proudly tell you what church they belong to, even if you never see them. And if they die, you have to pull out all the stops.
You gotta do it.
You get the dinner, yes, you gotta do it all.
Yeah.
Similarly, in Shelby County, the range of denominations, AME, there's Methodist, there's Baptist, Pentecostal, Apostolic. But as I said before, it's, as been intimated earlier, it is family-centered and cousin-centered and relationally centered. So there's a lot of similarities with that. You have to be aware that what happens in your church is known in every church.
Right, right.
It's part of dinner conversation among families, because you have families that go to all the different churches. They'll come together and say, well, did y'all have a good day today? What happened in your church today? And so the thing of managing a rural church and working with a rural congregation is the decisions that are made in your church are not local to your church.
That's
Right, right.
And so every decision that's made as a pastor, you have to consider the impact that it will have, not just on the church, but on families.
Right.
Can you state that again?
The impact, the decisions that are made in your local congregation, rural spaces, impacts beyond your congregation. Every decision you make, and it impacts the families that are connected in the community.
Please.
And in conjunction with that, most oftentimes, dates are already set for events for the year.
The sacred cows.
And one of the hardest, well, no, you're not going to be able
That's right.
to change the dates, because they know the dates of every other church in the community, and they know which Sunday and what time everybody's event takes place. And so you can't change the calendar. So get it out of your mind when you go there that you can change the date. You cannot.
Unless the date falls on Easter.
Unless it's, well,
Then
but,
you could, yeah, that's,
but the
then you're
reality
flexible about
is
Easter.
they coordinate all of the
That's
churches.
right.
All the dates.
And
That's
they
right.
respect each other's
right.
dates.
No, that's
and they
right.
do not put anything on anyone else's date.
That's right.
If you want a short tenure, change the dates.
That's right.
Received. Dr. Gray, I'm going to start with you. What is the single most pressing issue that African American churches in your rural context face?
The single issue, in my view, is this shift of political environment that we're in right now. And particularly in Shelby County, in our area, we've seen within the last 10 to 15 years, when I first started at Shelby County, you could not politically find a lot of Republican leadership locally within Shelby County, from the county judge executive to the mayor to all of the different significant political players. They were all Democrat for a long time until just a few years ago. There's just been this switch. We've even had public politicians who have gone and made public announcements at the courthouse that they were coming out of the Democratic Party to the Republican Party. And that is just, and it's been based on the usual reasons of conservative vehemence against what they would coin as liberal or progressive ideologies. And so, and that's the heavy influence of evangelicalism within the religious reality of rural communities. And in Shelby County, it's the same. The biggest challenge to African Americans' life and African American churches in Shelby County, and I believe in other rural communities, is the hard socio-political turn to the right. That hard turn that is inclusive of the racial roots, racist roots of church. So now you're challenged now to help to preach and to teach and to uplift the dignity and humanity of African Americans that we have always done as African American churches, that's now being seen as, from privileged persons, racist communication, and you run the risk of losing members among African Americans of which the only information that they're receiving is Fox News. So the challenge for African Americans in rural communities is this hard turn of the country that we're seeing in various different iterations around the country in rural spaces, of this socio-political turn to the right that is not being patient about differences of opinion. It is much more that, either you believe this or you think this, or you are not just wrong, you're demonic. That's the biggest challenge, I believe, right now to rural lives.
What effect is that having on black bodies, black people, black minds, black spirit?
It is a depressing impact because it plays out in employment spaces. It plays out in school spaces.
What does it do? Silence people?
Silence.
It silences?
The powers that be pushes silence more in more and more ways. People are reticent to speak their minds because their economies are dependent upon it. There's always been levels of that, but it is even much more stark in these last few years.
All right. Reverend McIntyre.
One of the things that I believe impact is the aging congregation. The younger persons leave and don't return. And in those aging congregations in rural spaces, just like in urban spaces, most of them who may have an income, it's a fixed income. Industry and economy is dwindling in those spaces. There are very few economic opportunities. Places are, when I first went to my first major rural space, Campbellsville, Kentucky, just before I arrived, Fruit of the Loom, who had been one of its major employers, shut down the plant and moved the operation to Mexico. After I arrived, the Batesville Casket Company also shut down. Within 2 years, the governor was able to get an Amazon distribution plant, but that doesn't always happen. And with the aging congregations and the lack of economic resources, denominations, especially those that depend on apportionments or per capita, seem to not want to be willing to adjust those askings in consideration that you can't expect a congregation of 9 people to pay $10,000. And you never visit, and the roof is coming in on one side, and one of the restrooms isn't working on the other side, but you still want us to pay, and you show no consideration for where we are, and that we are not the church that we once were 40, 50 years ago. The people there still love their church. They still want to support their church, and they'll do all that they can with the resources that they have. But as Michael Jackson once sang, they really don't care about us.
All right, Dr. Bryant. Issue.
I think the biggest issue facing the rural church at this point is that there is an identity crisis. I think that we love Jesus, we praise, we worship, but we're being inundated with propaganda, and by that, step back, the media markets in rural communities have all been bought up. And so now what you get is propaganda, not news.
That's right.
And so people are being fed stuff. When I sit at my mother's house and watch television, I can only watch Fox News free. I can't watch news. I can only see propaganda. The local television stations have been bought up. And so now they're all affiliates of Fox News. And so when you go throughout the country, you will find that rural markets are being purchased and taken over by Fox News. And so when you, even if you live in the city, if you watch and you listen, you will hear them start to talk about our sister station. And it's a Fox News station. And so they're doing that to the country. And so now we're receiving propaganda, and because in rural areas I don't have an alternative to the propaganda, I have an identity crisis, because now I'm starting to be told stuff that I'm struggling to believe, but yet it's the news, so
It's got
to be right. It's got to be true.
and it's the only thing I get, so and then the newspaper kind of, sort of backs it up. and so now I'm conflicted because this is what it says, and I don't really believe it, but after a while, it starts to come out in your conversation. After a while, it becomes part of your psyche. After a while, you start having these thoughts that are I want to say anti-Christian.
Yes.
And so there is an identity crisis created by the media being overtaken and only giving propaganda to those communities. And there's a major crisis, and when you look, you see that most of rural America now is Republican. Most of it. And so you don't know how that happened, but it has happened. And so I think that people are conflicted, and they're struggling with who they are and what they're supposed to believe. And then you're allowing a media outlet to tell you what it means to be Christian.
Okay, say more about that.
Well,
Example.
If I am not anti-abortion, I'm not a Christian.
Understand. Okay.
Abortion not my issue. I want people to eat. I want health insurance. But now you're telling me that I should be concerned about. I'm not concerned about abortion. That's not something that's going on in my community. What's happening here is people are starving.
Yes.
People are dying because they can't go to the doctor.
Yes.
So my issue is different than the issue you're telling me that makes me a Christian, so I am conflicted. Because I don't see what you're talking about. And I'm not buying what you're talking about. But yet it's in my mind that I should be.
So that's a war against the spirit. That's
It's a war.
warring on the spirit.
Absolutely. And so we have these struggles and these battles that are being created by external forces that we would never otherwise be battling.
That are profoundly anti-black.
They're anti.
At their core are anti-black.
Absolutely.
Yes.
At the core.
Absolutely.
At the core. I mean, in fact, maybe one of the organizing principles and business model of it is anti-black.
Anti. And to want health care is anti-Christian. And to think that I should have it, because that's the way the propaganda works.
Yes.
It makes me think that I'm wrong. And it makes me forget that when I apply for Social Security, I paid that money. You ain't giving me no
That's right.
handout. I paid it.
You paid it?
It's my money.
That's right.
You owe me.
Not preacher.
Come on, preacher.
That's a mafia move.
That's right. That's a mafia. That's right. I'm entitled because I paid
So-
into it.
Okay.
It's not an entitlement. That's my money.
That's right.
I am entitled to it, but it is not an entitlement.
Entitlement.
You
That's right.
owe me.
That's right.
That's right.
What you took from me.
That's right.
Yes.
President?
I would add to what my esteemed colleagues have said. This equation in our rural communities, there is a race to the bottom when it comes to economic development.
Yeah.
What do I mean by that? I mean that in other parts of our country, local municipalities will provide incentives for businesses to come to them and require that those businesses also provide training opportunities, development opportunities for their employees and the like. But in a rural context, the expectation from local elected officials and whatever sparse business operations there may be is that new companies will come in and they will receive absolutely every tax break on the face of the earth possible.
Yeah.
And the regulatory and compliance mechanisms that are in place will be relaxed so that they can do whatever it is that they want to do, paying the people as little as possible, including the absence of benefits.
Yes. Yes.
What this means then is that the drain of our young people and young professionals, et cetera, that has already been mentioned, will continue exponentially. And to me, this is a terrible problem. But the flip side of this, which we haven't talked about, is that in our churches, because of the very negative characterization of rural churches and rural places in our seminaries and in our denominations, people who will graduate don't want to go there. These are not the places where you get pride of prestige.
Yeah.
These are not the places where you will go and find that your status has been enhanced.
Yeah.
These are the places where you will have to go and roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty and be impactful in ways that may take far longer than our egos desire.
Talk.
That's right.
Say
I have
that.
seen this
Yes.
in place after place where I have worked. The great reluctance of our students who have bought into the idea that ministry is about the best and the brightest. No, it's not.
No, it's not.
It's about the most dedicated and committed
That's right.
to the work of the good news.
Yeah.
And until we decide that this is an appropriate vocational emphasis for us, this is going to continue to be an issue.
That's right.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Reverend Story.
I've thought a lot about this, and the number one pressing issue for me, for African Americans in the Winchester area, is the lack of utilization of educational opportunities. And I say that because within 100 miles of Winchester, there's the University of Kentucky, there's the University of Louisville, there's Georgetown University, there's Eastern Kentucky University, and there's Kentucky State University. That's not any trade school, that's not anything else. Now, I looked at statistics from, and the latest I have is 2015. 323 white students were attending some type of college or trade school from Winchester. 23 African American persons were attending some type of college or trade school. That means that the white students were 14 times more likely to attend some type of college or vocational training. And we might ask why. If nobody in your family's ever been to college, a lot of times you don't have nobody to motivate you.
That's right.
My parents pushed it, you going to school. And that's something I always knew was the next step. And it's not because, and some people, their parents don't care. That is so not true. But you do what you know. So somewhere along the line, we've got to change that. And yes, there's grants and all that, but we all know they're being cut. And if you don't have the money, you can't go. So that's something that really, really concerns me.
Church, is there any follow-up question that you want to ask the panelists off of anything that you have heard so far? Yes, sir. And then in the back, Dana. Yes, sir.
Excuse me, Dr. Bryant, this question is to you. You talked about the identity crisis. How do you propose we fight this identity crisis? How do we attack that in a spiritual way?
I think that, number one, you have to be able to present the truth to people. And so we have to be able to provide alternatives to what they're hearing and then help them to understand that what they're hearing has shifted. Because even the news on BET is no longer the news.
That's right.
It has shifted. And I think that if we don't have conversations about our new realities and the new messaging that's coming to us, then we don't realize that we're being tainted and that we're being propagandized and that we're being given something that's not going to help us, but it's going to hurt us. And so it's up to us to know the truth and to share the truth and even to create circles where we sit and we talk about what's happening currently and what the real answer to it is and what the real problem is versus what we heard on the news. And so maybe you should even create a panel or I don't know if you have enough people in your church, because some people read papers every day and others read the paper no day. But you have to have a group of people who will help to have the conversation with the congregation about what's really taking place and why we're receiving this kind of news when it's not true. I think that we do have to deal with the reality that we've entered into an age where the truth has been taken prisoner.
Dana.
The population of Winchester is about 18,000. Winchester has 8.83% African Americans, so less than 2%. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Dan.
Regarding the media, that was very interesting. I did not know that, and very powerful. That makes sense when it comes to voting as well. So how did that happen? And what ways can you see that something can happen on the ground or something can happen in getting another station into either where you are or into rural areas to make a difference there? Social media, what can you recommend?
Well, let's back up. One of the things that happened is we changed the laws. It used to be the law that in order for a communications company to be purchased, it had to be published, and you had to know that someone else was trying to purchase that company. That's no longer the law. Now they can just buy it in silence, and so you have no idea that it has changed hands. And so the law has changed, and you got to remember that we're in an administration that's deregulating everything that it can. So there's no regulations on the media. And there used to be a time where the truth was important. And so somehow we turned the page on that. And so when you talk about media, it costs money to have a media outlet. And one of the reasons we don't have our own, because it costs money.
That's right.
So the Rupert Murdochs of the world he owns the media in Europe and America.
And Australia.
So he has money to buy all of the markets in America, and we sit quietly by. I can't remember the name of the company. There's a company in Dallas that owns a huge number of the markets in America, and Rupert Murdoch and a couple of other companies are buying up the rest. BET was purchased by a company, Viacom, that's actually supposed to be Democratic. But when you listen to the news on BET now, you're clear that whatever is going on is not news. It's propaganda still. So I don't know what happened to the news part with Viacom, but that used to be a Democratic organization, but it's not anymore, not the news part. So what would we do? We either have to pool our resources and create our own, and that's a whole different level of issue.
That could be year 2, that we talk about how to organize it.
Yeah, but you could do it, but it's a whole different level of thought, and you have to be willing to put money in it.
Yeah.
Real money.
Yes, ma'am, you have a question. Please stand and speak.
I'm sorry, I can't stand.
Okay.
But what do you do with the old belief of you don't mix church with politics? Even though the number of people may not be as great, but you still have those people who are pillars of the community, that you don't bring those politics inside our church. It has nothing to do with God.
I would say those same people are probably the primary politicians in the church. They don't want you to talk about it. But trust me, whenever two people assemble together, there are politics.
That is politics. That's the definition of politics.
Yeah, so if you don't want to talk about issues, then you don't have to talk about politics. You can talk about how many people are sick in the community. And what are you going to do about it? Bring AARP. That's not politics. That's helping them.
That's right.
And AARP will talk about the sickness in the community.
I would add to that that when there's some communication that comes to you that says we need to keep politics out of the church, just simply tell them that we can't talk about Jesus anymore. I mean, it's time to have a Bible study and to see what Jesus did as Jesus went about teaching about advancing God's agenda, and also that the whole reason why Jesus was crucified was because of political
That's right.
There cannot be any discussion of life anywhere without involving the powers that order life in that area. There's no way to even do that.
Usually the code there is don't talk about liberal politics or politics that liberate human beings.
Yes.
Politics is simply a conversation between two or more people about how we live together. That's
right.
all politics is. So every single time two people decide how they're going to live together and how they're going to portion their money or who's going to buy food and keep the house and all their business, those are political discussions. What people get squirrely about is when we talk about partisan conversations that are around ideology and things of that sort. So yes, you have to stop talking about Jesus. You really also have to stop talking about God, and you really have to shut the whole Bible if we don't want to talk about, because the whole thing is it's political discussion about how we're going to live together, and how we're going to live with God, and how we're going to live with our neighbors. So living with God, living with neighbor, political discussion, put it back and ask, okay, so what do you want us to talk about now?
That's right. That's a political discussion.
Yeah.
Other questions? Sir.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning.
Let me just go into all of what has been said. I wanted to perhaps ask if it's reasonable for us to perhaps say that we're living in a Trump America where the voice of rural America has never resounded greater in the life of our country. In fact, rural America is driving the White House.
Is driving?
Driving, influencing it in such a manner that it's impacting all of our spaces. I heard Dr. McIntosh relate to this matter, that I tried to put it in words, but she was saying that church and religious elements are not confined or defined by geographical location. I've never been in a more rural space than the space we were in last night in Louisville. So I had an opportunity to just peruse a little bit of your introduction to Du Bois' work on the Negro Church. And would you contend that for Du Bois, he was highly critical, of course, of what he called the fringes in our churches, and did not really have an appreciation for rural black religion until he came south to Tennessee and so on and so forth. But would you think he would contend that our black church rural experience continues to be primarily influenced by that rural expression that I think, and you made a good argument that he did, that he remained highly critical of up until his leaving the country?
Well, he was critical of it because he didn't know it.
Yes.
If you ain't been there,
That's right.
You don't know.
can't go there.
Yeah.
So, in not only in Du Bois's case, but in the case of many of us who have quote unquote education, we have decided that we can separate ourselves from our kith and kin, no matter where they are on the face of the earth. That we are better than, that we know more than, and I'm just struck by the fact that in our day and time, not only does that continue to be the case. I would have a slightly different take on the whole issue of where we are with respect to the media. I've never found the media, our public presentation of information to black people, it has never been constructive. It has never been productive. It has never been liberating.
That's right.
There have been people in those contexts who have taken journalism into different places that would free us, like Ida B. Wells. But on the whole, the reproduction of information in this society has always been to pejoritize, stereotype, castigate, and denigrate black people.
That's right.
This is what we're seeing today is not new in that regard.
That's it.
Yeah.
I think what's new in this today is that as a people, our faith has not been as strong as it once was.
Yeah.
That's, to me, that's the difference.
Yeah.
And the reason for that, I believe, is because we have decided to drink the Kool-Aid.
That's right.
And when you decide to drink the Kool-Aid, then there's nowhere to go. Ask the people of Jonestown. That's a very dramatic illustration, I think, of what is happening to so many of our communities, that we are now discovering that there is something amazing about rural contexts and rural churches. But they are not to be, somebody used the word yesterday, fetishized, or someone was saying, I don't remember who it was, but this is not about romanticizing what goes on in rural spaces.
That's right.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing that there is an interior strength that is born of strong people who come out of these places, and our responsibility, whether we are there or not, ought to be to hear, to listen, and then to partner, to collaborate, to do the very kind of community organizing that you are talking about. Identity is a struggle for some of us because we have, part of the Kool-Aid that we have drunk is that there is something not only antithetical about religion and politics, there's something antithetical about being black and being Christian. I don't have time for that. If you are a born-again African person, you ought to be proud of that. And take it into our context as ministers of the gospel, as lay people. Let me tell you a story. When I was pastoring a congregation in a rural church in North Carolina, I had all the highfalutin education. Yes. And now the reason why I became the pastor was because my wife and I were members of a rural congregation, because that's what we love to do. That's where our hearts were. The pastor left, and the church literally turned around and looked at me.
That's how it
I
happens.
became the new pastor.
That's how it happens. That's how it happens.
So I told them that I would be their pastor on two conditions. One, they'd take all the white Jesuses off the walls. They said, okay, pastor. And the other condition was, this was a Baptist church. The other condition was all the leadership officers in the church had to be women and men. Okay, pastor. They humored me. They humored me. They did exactly as I asked. And I said, I got this thing. This is easy.
We're good. Yeah. We're good.
They took me to the woodshed.
Yeah, I bet they did.
And in due season, what I came to understand was that they were teaching me more than I could ever teach them.
That's right.
That's what happens.
And so I let their message mold my ministry.
Yes.
And our Bible study transformed into something amazing.
Yes.
The senior-most member of our church, I will never forget her. I talked to her regularly until she died. She stood up one day in Bible study after I had done all of my pro-this, liberation that. She stood up one day in Bible study and said, Brother Pastor, I think it's time that we added the name of Martin Luther King to the scriptures. After that, the dam broke. The sky was blue. The earth was green. And religion and politics were joined together because our identity as a people, culturally and faith-wise, were now together.
Yes.
And we went on running to see what the end would be.
Yes.
If we decide that we are going to continue to compartmentalize our identity and our being,
Yes.
we're not going to be able to make the impact, particularly on our young people that we're.
That's right.
Yeah.
We have two more questions. Oh, yes, sir. Please.
Sister Dr. McIntosh, you did hit on something. The elephant in the room, so to speak, that the Black Church historically, maybe not today, but historically, has been conservative. That's the elephant in the room, especially in the rural context. And I think there's some deeper reasons, maybe because of that. There are some political structures and some propaganda going on, but it was conservative before then. So in 1920, 1819, where are we going to go with it? And I think the life of the Bible, and you hit on that too, the life of the Bible in the local Black church, anywhere, but in particular in the rural setting, is critical, vital. If you were to say, what is true? Like it was asked earlier, in a rural setting, Black church said the Bible is true. Amen, the Bible is true. And if they thought for a moment you were not agreeing with that, they put you out. I know if I go to my granny's house and say anything, if she even thinks I'm thinking that something's not true in the Bible, get out there. So I think there has to be addressed at some point, the hermeneutic, the historical, literal, grammatical approach to scripture that rural Black church folks have, generally, has to be addressed. It has to, because that's really the ethos that the scripture is true, and that creates a division that sometimes creates schizophrenia or identity crisis. Because at the end of the day, Fox News appears, and I'm a covenantal, so I have no dog in the fight, appears to agree with some of the things the scriptures say on just a real surface level. That's the issue, is they're making an appeal. And in the role of politics in a role setting, they say, well, my family, because it's family, my family will take care of me. I don't care what the government's doing.
Yeah.
My baby's gonna take care of me, my cousin's gonna take care of me. So they're not necessarily looking to structures to do so. And so it's a different ethos though. So the role of scripture, something has to be addressed. Thank you, sister.
Well, once as a seminary student, the question was asked by a professor, would you be afraid to preach what you knew to be true and honest for fear that your congregation would either terminate your employment or report you to your ecclesial superiors? And my response to the question was, my congregation would not report me or demand my removal if I stepped on their toes or gave them some hard truths. They would report me and demand my removal if they believed I was not preaching and teaching the truth. What we must learn, especially in the Black church as a whole, what the media tells us the issues are may not be the issues in our context.
Right. That's the issue.
Yes, they still want to be respected in public spaces. And as long as we stand for what the Word of God tells us when we preach the truth of the prophets, they don't care about Tillich and Bart. They care, what did Isaiah say? What did Elijah say? What did Jesus say? What did Paul say? As long as you can support your preaching with the Word of God, you're all right.
I saw your hand, sir. You'll be our last question. Thank you.
One quick observation I'd like to say is that as we, and I applaud schools for doing what we've done with the rural ministry in rural churches, but I also want to say just an observation. Rural churches exist in our major metropolitan cities.
Yes, yes.
They do.
Say more about that, sir.
Yes, yes.
In our major metropolitan cities, and there's a lot of work that I do with, I'm not a minister, there's a lot of work that I do that involves churches. But what I am finding is that, let's take Atlanta, because it's considered to be the mecca for Black excellence. Even within Atlanta, we have become so separated that we have small churches within these major metropolitan areas that have the exact same challenges as a church that is sitting out in the 5,000 population community. And I applaud you for this. So I'm simply saying, as we talk about the rural churches in the country, let's also don't forget our small churches in these thriving provinces.
That's right. That's right.
It is the marginalized, pushed to the edge population that are there facing those same challenges.
Yes. I don't want to ignore, let's just raise the two questions. Sir, your hand was up.
Yes. I think one of the things that I'm hearing, I heard Dr. McIntosh and Pastor Snorton speak to this, that there is an increasing aging population in rural America and Black America. So what I'm, and if I'm hearing this correct, is that the rural Black church is dying. Is that a correct assumption? And if so, are there things in place or being done to help with those issues?
I'd like to say something. I can only talk about Winchester. We are not done.
Okay.
Some of the statistics may sound dreadful or may sound bad. Last year we took in members. We took in 9 new members. And for those of you who have big churches, that may not sound like anything. But in the country, everybody,
Glory.
that's a church grandma.
9? Oh, yeah.
That's a glory.
9 people, and every one of them, 7 of them were young men
Yeah. That's major.
under the age of 14. If your church can garner children, your church will lead. Now, you have to do something with them once they get there. You can't just say, oh, we've got our kids, they're so cute. No, you've got to do something.
That's right.
And this is 2019. You can't just sing Jesus loves me.
That's
You
right.
have to do some stuff. But if you can continue to bring children, young adults, now that I have the children, I have a couple of the parents that are coming. So there is progress, but you have to work. That's something I think we forget. But you have to work. You have to involve them and make sure that they are involved.
Your issue is I know we've got to go. Your issue is a deeper one, and that is what are the evangelism strategies for rural churches?
That's right.
This church, Reverend Storton's church, has one. If the congregation is aging and dying, and the congregation is dying from attrition and has no evangelism strategy, that probably is. Yes. Church, thank you. 2 minutes to turn it around, and we are 10 o'clock for our first set of lectures. Thank you.